All right, so today we're going to talk about how we solve quadratics by graphing and factoring. This will help us with solving polynomials moving forward, so we'll review a bit about that. Okay, so those are our learning targets. Before we get going today, how many candy hearts are in this bag before I opened it? Okay. How do I find roots or solutions of quadratics? Remember, roots are the solutions of polynomial equations. If you graph it, they will show up as your x-intercepts. Okay, so in this case, like these are roots. Okay, so one way to find roots is by graphing them and seeing where they cross the x-axis or your x-intercepts. Okay. So finding all the roots of higher degree polynomials can be difficult, but we have lots of ways to solve smaller degree polynomials like quadratics. We're going to use some of these to help us with the bigger polynomials. So you'll notice here, right, on a graph, if solving quadratics, often they will show up as your x-intercepts. Now, if they're imaginary, that won't, and that is an issue. But what we're going to do is just kind of review how do we solve quadratics? We're going to start with these two first, graphing and factoring, and review those. These you did learn when you were in your algebra classes. Okay, so let's review. So say you have a function f of x equals x squared minus 6x plus 8, and you need to solve it, and they're asking you to do that by graphing. Well, one of the things that you could do, and what I would recommend, is you use your graphing calculator, okay? So now, if you've had any issues, I have, certainly. If you go to your MCA calculator app, go to grades 8 and 11, you get this blank screen. If you go to the upper right, there's a circle with a diamond in it. It's a compass. Just tap that, and it will push it to Safari. Okay, and it will open up, and now I'm good to go. So now I'm just going to go to the y equals screen and type in my function, which was x squared minus 6x plus 8. Press graph. Okay. Now, remember, we're looking for where it crosses the x-axis. So if you look here, it appears that it crosses at 2 and at 4, okay? But you want to be sure. So you're going to go to your table, which is in blue right above where it says graph there. So I'm going to hit the blue button, second, and then table, okay? And now I'm going to look at 2 and confirm that it is actually a 0. Yep, okay? And then 4, notice the y value is also 0. So 2 and 4 are definitely my solutions. So I'm going to go back to my assignment or my notes here, and I'm going to write x equals 2 and x equals 4. These are my two solutions, and I've confirmed that by graphing and using the table. Okay. Now, sometimes when you graph, you're going to get a quadratic like this one right here. Oops, this one right here, right? It does not cross the x-axis at all. So what does this mean? Well, we already talked about this. This means I have two roots, I have two answers, but they're not real. So I have 0 real roots, I have 2 imaginary roots. So you can write either one of those. You can write 2 imaginary roots or no real roots. By graphing, I cannot find my roots here. That won't work. So there are some drawbacks. One of them is graphing only works if the solutions are real. Okay. The second one that is a drawback is if you have an answer like this crosses at a really ugly number, like maybe negative 3.875 blah, 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 continuing, then that's not going to be easy to find as well. So this can be hard to find if the solutions aren't nice, like these numbers were right here, 2 and 4. Those are pretty nice numbers. That's not always easy to find with your graphing calculator if they don't land there. And oftentimes they don't. So we need some other methods then. So what are some other methods? Well, another way you can solve a quadratic is by factoring. Okay, so these are factoring when x squared plus bx plus c, where the leading coefficient is 1. Okay, so this is how you do that. If you remember from your algebra days, what you do is you look for two numbers that multiply to be c here, this thing, but add up to be b. Okay, so hopefully this makes some sense. Maybe you remember this. Remember, factoring is just distributive property backwards. Okay, so what I'm really looking for is two numbers that multiply to be this, but add up to be this. So two numbers that multiply to be 56. First, I'm going to start by, if I distribute, in order to get x squared, I'm going to need an x here and here. Okay, so that x times x gives me x squared. Okay, so now I need two numbers that multiply to be 56. Now you're going to go through and you might write down a bunch of them, 1 and 56, 2 and 28, etc. But eventually you're going to run across 8 and 7, right? And it has to add up to 15, positive 15. Well, 8 plus 7 is 15. So these are my two roots, or two factors that I want to use. So this would be, doesn't matter if you put the 7 first or the 8 first, doesn't really matter, as long as the signs with them are correct. Okay, so now that you've figured out that, then what you do is you're going to set this equal to 0. Remember, roots are where the function equals 0. So what are my two values for x, now that I factored this, that will make this equal to 0? In other words, what value for x would make this equal 0? Negative 8. Now that would make this, if I put a negative 8 in here, that would make that negative 1. But 0 times negative 1 is still 0, so that still works. So how about the second? Well, what would make this equal 0 would be negative 7. Okay, now if I put a negative 7 here, again, that's going to give me positive 1, but I'm multiplying by 0, so that's still going to give me 0. So my two answers here, or my solutions, would be x equals negative 8 and x equals negative 7. You're going to factor it first and then set it equal to 0. Okay, that's how you solve by factoring if they're in x squared plus bx plus c form. Okay, let's just go over a few more to get you acclimated to this again. I'm sure you probably remember this a bit, but x here, x here. Okay, so two numbers that multiply to be negative 36, but add up to be 5. So I want to start with numbers that multiply to be 36. Eventually you're going to come across 9 and 4, give you 36. But that's not negative 36. So now, which one do I have to put the negative on? I need one of them to be negative, right? If I add negative 9 plus 4, that'll give me negative 5. I need positive 5. So I'm going to have to put the negative here. 9 times negative 4 is negative 36. 9 plus negative 4 is 5. So that's the one I want. So now I've got that. Positive 9, negative 4. I'm going to set it equal to 0 now and say, all right, my two roots then, or solutions, would be negative 9 and positive 4. Okay, so these are my answers now. All right. So once again, that's how you solve by factoring if it's in x squared plus bx plus c form. Okay, one more. I'm going to go, okay, x. Negative 12 has to multiply to b and add up to negative 4. So that would be negative 6, positive 2. Set it equal to 0. So x equals 6, x equals negative 2. Okay. All right, and that's how you factor x squared plus bx plus c. All right. Now, what do you do if you need to factor and your leading coefficient is something other than 1? Okay, in this case it's a 3. Then you have to use a different method. And I taught this to you in algebra before, but I also put those steps right here if you want to review those. That's how you factor ax squared plus bx plus c. So let's review how this works. All right, the first thing you're going to do is we're going to write y equals, okay, and you're going to write x squared minus 14x and then put a blank. Okay, now notice you're not going to write the a value here, that 3. I notice I wrote just the leading coefficient of 1 right now. We'll incorporate that 3 right here. Then what you're going to do is you're going to go a times c, and you're going to write it in the blank. So a is 3 times negative 4. You're going to put that, or negative 24, excuse me, and you're going to write that in the blank, which would be minus 72. Okay, so now I'm just going to follow these steps. I'm going to factor this. So now this one might take you a little while to find these. This is a little bit trickier one. It's 18 and 4. Now there's a bunch of numbers that multiply to be 72, but it's going to end up being negative 18 and positive 4. Whoops, I need my x in here, right? Okay, great. All right, so anyways, you get those. You factor just like normal. Now this is the part that's weird. If you remember, what you're going to do is you're going to take this a and you're going to put it underneath both of these. Okay, and then you need to reduce both the fractions. Okay, all right, so I'm going to have x minus 18 over 3 is 6. This is 4/3. It's going to stay 4/3. Okay. Now, we're going to write, this one is now lastly, if there are any denominators, you're going to move them in front of the x. So this becomes 3x plus 4. Okay, now you have factored it, but that's not how you solve by factoring. Remember, to solve, you have to set it equal to 0. Well, this first one is easy. It's 6. The second one is a little trickier. It's not obvious. You can't just write negative 4 there. That's not quite right, right? 3x plus 4. When does this equal 0? You can solve this. Subtract 4. Divide by 3. You get negative 4/3. But it's a little easier to actually just look right here, right? It says positive 4/3. What would be the opposite of that to make that 0? Negative 4/3. So you could just do that instead. It's easier. And so these are my two answers. Make sure you show all this work here, because that's showing that you know how to do this by factoring, okay? Let's try one more to make sure we're good. A little practice with this. Okay, so again, I'm just going to follow these steps that are on the right. So x squared plus x. In the blank, I'm going to write a times c. So this would be 6 times negative 2, negative 12. You can keep this as g of x if you want. I'm going to factor two numbers that multiply to be negative 12 but add up to be 1 would be positive 4 and negative 3. Okay, now I'm going to take this 6 and I'm going to put it underneath, right? So this is going to go here and here. Reduce, don't forget this reduce step, really important. Okay, so this is going to be x plus 2/3, x minus 1/2. Okay, still g of x. Now I'm going to move this in front, so this would end up being 3. Denominators get moved in front, so 3x plus 2 and 2x minus 1. So this is the factored form. I want to set it equal to 0. What are my x values that would make this equal 0? Again, you can look here at this line to determine that. So my x values would be negative 2/3 and positive 1/2. Okay, if you were to plug in negative 2/3 here, you would get 0. If you were to plug in 1/2 here, you would get 0. So these are my two roots, okay? And that is a review of solving by graphing and factoring. All right, so what I would like you to do is try this. Don't forget to write this in your student assignment book, your planner, and then check it off when you turn it in. Have a good one.